That skinny guy over there? Yeah, that's our main character, known as the weakest E-rank hunter out there. Yup, you heard that right. Thanks to his reputation, everyone mocked him. As if that wasn't enough, his mother was sick, so he had to take care of both her and his little sister. And that's why he went into dungeons to fight monsters. But what he didn't expect was to get trapped one day in a dungeon with his entire team, and the only way out was to pray to a giant statue. But they made the wrong prayer, and the god got really mad, wiping out most of the team, leaving our hero barely alive. But right at that moment, something mysterious happened. What was it? You'll see. After escaping that dungeon, he had to train like an S-rank hunter for the rest of his life. Thanks to that, he turned into a total hunk. Even his voice changed. But beyond that, his new powers forced him to become the strongest hunter of them all. If you want more, let me give you some context. The story begins on an island where we see a group of warriors battling giant ants. However, these guys weren't strong enough to defeat them, and they started getting beaten up. But just when they thought all was lost, a team of S-rank hunters arrived to save their hides. And you're probably wondering why there are hunters and monsters. Well, it turns out this scene took place 3 years ago. We also learned that one day, portals began appearing all over the world, leading to dungeons filled with monsters. At the same time, humans started awakening special abilities to fight these creatures, since military weapons were useless against them. These humans were called hunters. Furthermore, we learned that they were classified by rank based on their magical power. The most overpowered rank was S, followed by A, B, C, D, and the weakest of all E. These ranks were unchangeable. No matter how hard hunters trained, they were stuck with the rank they initially received. And this is where we meet our protagonist, Sung Jin Woo, the weakest hunter of all. Because of this, he was quite well known among other hunters, especially since he was the only one who got hurt in an E-rank dungeon. The worst part, he knew he was weak, but it wasn't all bad. He did have a beautiful B-rank waifu who cared about him, Juhi. She asked him if he was sure about going on the next raid with the guild members, and he told her he was. Then he joined the rest of his friends to enter the dungeon. Elsewhere, we meet President Go, who's also the leader of the hunters. This old man explains to one of his subordinates how important hunters are nowadays, as they're responsible for entering dungeons to defeat monsters. He also says that after killing monsters, hunters receive crystals they can exchange for money or even weapons, depending on the monster's rank. Meanwhile, back with our hero, while he's fighting a goblin, his knife breaks and he almost gets filleted. But luckily, his friends save him, and we find out that Juhi uses healing magic as she begins healing him. While doing so, she tells him he should stop going into dungeons with them because he always ends up hurt. But our hero has no choice. He goes only to earn money to support his family. However, he might need to think about a different job since he almost died and only got an E-rank crystal from the entire raid. But it doesn't end there, because when the guys defeated all the monsters, they found a tunnel. They thought it might lead to another D-rank dungeon, which was good news for them since it meant more loot. They weren't sure though, so they voted on whether to explore it or leave. After voting, there was a tie, but our hero hadn't voted yet. Since he needed to take care of his sister and his sick mother, he decided to go, hoping to earn more for his mom's treatment. Elsewhere, we see some thieves steal a waifu's purse and escape on a motorcycle, but during their getaway, a blonde girl stops them epically. This loli is Cha Hae-in, an S-rank hunter. Embarrassed by the crowd's cheers, she escapes, leaping like Spider-Man across rooftops. Back with the hunters, they reach the end of the tunnel and find a giant door. Inside, they don't see any monsters or a boss. All they see are giant statues holding weapons, with one larger statue seated on a throne. Yup, this doesn't look good at all. They find an ancient text listing the rules of the Kart Inan temple: respect God, worship, and finally, believe in God. And if the rules are not followed, they won't leave alive. As Chief Song reads the rules, the waifu with our hero gets scared because the main statue turned to look at them. But Sung ignored her, saying she probably imagined it. If only that were true, but no, because right after reading the rules, the doors shut and one of the hunters, terrified, started saying it was a bad idea to come. When he tried opening the doors, one of the statues sliced him up instantly. Seeing this, everyone panicked and realized they were trapped. When our hero looked at the main statue, he noticed it was staring at them, preparing to shoot a ray from its eyes and send more of them to meet their maker. Thankfully, he realized it just in time and managed to warn everyone, sparing them from getting roasted. Even so, they were terrified, as there seemed to be no way out and death seemed inevitable. But just before he was sent to meet his maker, the timer ran out and a notification window appeared talking about the value of the weak. In short, it said he had the qualities to become a player, and if he didn't accept, his heart would stop. Since he didn't have much choice, right after that, he woke up in the hospital without any injuries. He even had his arm and leg back, which he'd lost in the battle. Yeah, people, that's either one hell of a hospital or something weird is going on. In fact, he couldn't even believe what had happened and almost thought it was all a dream. But no, right at that moment, Woo Jinchul, a guy who works as a supervisor in the Hunters Association, arrives to question him about what happened in the dungeon. When they went to search for them with an S-rank hunter, they only found him him, and there were no signs of the statues that had attacked them. Jinchul also informs him that Chief Song was forced to retire due to losing his arm, and Juhee was seeing a therapist because she'd been traumatized by the ordeal. After everything that happened, people started wondering if Jean had experienced a second awakening. Awakening is what turns humans into hunters. It can happen randomly, like when our hero was working on a construction site, minding his own business, and then bam, he felt something in his body that triggered his special abilities. Anyway, in rare cases, hunters can experience a second awakening, allowing them to reach a much higher rank than they initially had, and they thought this might be Jin's case. But no, they ran a test with a measuring device, and he was still weaker than Mr. Satan, so they left. What they didn't know was that our hero could see the notification window that popped up right before he died in the temple. And just as he's looking at it, his sister arrives, worried about him. He asks her if she can see the notification window, but the little one says no, so to avoid looking crazy, he drops the subject. Once his waifu leaves, our hero starts exploring his new system, which gives him daily missions, like exercising, and if he doesn't complete them, he's sent to a desert in another dimension where he has to run from giant monsters for 4 hours as punishment. Meanwhile, we see an S-rank hunter named Choi ask the blonde girl to start training the rookie hunters. Back to our hero, he starts training to avoid punishment. As he does, he's rewarded with points to boost his stats. Yes, people, the system worked just like a video game, with stats for strength, agility, vitality, and more. As he completes missions, he's given rewards like a key that grants him access to a secret dungeon. But not wanting a repeat of last time, he thinks twice before going. Later, he visits his mother, and we learn that ever since the portals appeared, a strange illness called the eternal sleep has also emerged. It's caused by prolonged exposure to mana, has no cure, and all they can do is extend the patient's life. Because of this, our hero quit his construction job and became a hunter to pay for his mother's treatment. With this new chance, he vows to become stronger, pouring all his points into strength, and heads into the secret dungeon. Upon entering, he realizes that no one else can see it because it's in another dimension, from which he can't leave until he defeats all the monsters and the boss. He starts searching for them, and we quickly see that he's gotten stronger as he takes down 3 goblins. But just then, a wolf shows up and breaks his knife. Despite being scared, our hero starts defending himself with his fists and moving faster, thanks to the attributes he had leveled up. But that wasn't enough to defeat the wolf. He needed a weapon. That's when he remembers he has an inventory, so he opens it, pulls out a sword, and slices the wolf with a single blow. At that moment, he realizes that the monsters in this dungeon don't drop crystals, but rather stones that he can sell for gold within his system. He also levels up. We then learn that he can exit the dungeon using a teleportation stone, which he obtains after defeating a pack of wolves that keep attacking him. At the same time, he notices that the monsters have names and colors that identify them. White means they're weak, yellow means they're at his level, and red indicates they're stronger than him. He discovers all this while slaying monsters and leveling up. Along the way, he gathers several artifacts, but he decides not to use the teleportation stone to escape the dungeon because he wants to get stronger. So he chooses to press on to defeat the boss. But upon reaching the final level, he encounters Kazaka, a giant serpent that starts beating him up. However, while dodging the serpent, he recalls how poorly others treated him. Fueled by anger, he grabs the serpent by the neck and, with his own hands, finishes it off. After defeating the boss, he levels up again and is rewarded with the C-rank poisonous dagger, which has the ability to paralyze enemies with its venom and also offers life drain. He also receives an A-rank poisonous potion that increases his physical damage but damages his muscles, so he decides to save it for later. Once he finishes checking his rewards, the dungeon disappears and everything returns to normal. But when he exits the subway, he notices it's nighttime and everything is deserted. This is because a portal had appeared, and since there were few hunters lately, they had let a week pass, allowing the monsters to come out and wreak havoc. One of the guards finds him and takes him to where the other hunters are battling the boss. Among the hunters is Juhee, who, despite not being ready to return to the dungeons, was practically forced to help due to the need for support. However, she hadn't overcome her trauma from the temple, so she was practically doing nothing. That's when our hero starts observing the monster with his enhanced perception and realizes it's a low-rank boss, just like the hunters fighting it, who couldn't even break its defenses. So he decides to use the broken sword he has left and throws it from a distance at the monster, managing to break its defenses. Thanks to that, the other hunters seize the opportunity to finish it off. After this, one of the hunters notices someone had helped them, but our hero slips away before anyone can see him. The next day, our hero continues his training while still in the hospital, getting so ripped that the nurses start swooning over him and even ask for his phone number before he's discharged. But it wasn't just his body that had changed. He'd also grown taller, his voice had deepened, and he exuded way more confidence. Meanwhile, we see an S-rank hunter named Baek Yoon-ho as a guest on a TV show, where he's interviewed and talks a bit about the life of an S-rank hunter. Back to our hero, we see him reflecting that his transformation is is due to the skills he's leveled up. And speaking of that, when he checks his stats, he notices he has 12 points available, which he distributes among strength, agility, and perception. Right then, he gets a call reminding him to pay his rent, so he starts looking for work. He finds a group that needs an extra person for a C-rank dungeon raid. When he arrives with the group, he decides to keep his newfound strength a secret to avoid drawing attention. However, the downside is that the other hunters don't want to split the crystals with him and only offer to pay him for carrying their gear. Since it's the best option he has at the moment, he agrees to the contract. We're introduced to more secondary characters here, but the main ones are Dong-suk, the group leader and a C-rank hunter, and Yu Jinho, a novice D-rank hunter with high-quality combat gear. He seems to be wealthy. As they enter the dungeon, the guys start taking down monsters quickly. But there's something about them that doesn't sit right with our hero. The payment they offered him for carrying supplies seemed too good, so he starts getting suspicious. As they proceed, they come across a mana mine, which has considerable economic value for hunters. Seeing the amount, Jinho suggests to the leader that they split it 8 ways and give a share to our hero, since they only need to collect it and he could help. The leader agrees, but only after they defeat the dungeon's final boss, a giant spider sleeping right above them. It's here that we realize our hero's suspicions were spot on. The Sons of Fruit pretend they forgot the mining equipment and go off to get it, leaving him and Jinho alone to keep an eye on the beast. But in reality, they're betraying them, locking them inside. Our hero had seen this coming, though. This kind of backstabbing is common in dungeons, where there are no cameras, and weaker hunters are often used as bait to steal their gear. But he has no intention of dying, so he draws his dagger and tells Jinho he'll handle it. In a change of scene, we see one of the thugs tell Dong-suk that they should have just killed them, but the boss says no, it was better to leave them as bait. Once the spider devours them, it'll go back to sleep, allowing them to mine the mana in peace. And if they can't, they'll at least be able to steal the rich kid's gear. Back with our hero, he uses his perception to realize that this boss is even stronger than Kazaka, but still, he goes all out in battle. While Jinho watches the fight, he realizes that our hero is far stronger than he let on and has been hiding his true power. Back to the action, our hero finally takes down the boss. But it doesn't end there. Just then, Dong-suk returns with his team to collect the mana, and when they see the beast has been defeated, they assume it was Jinho who did it. To spare his life, they order him to kill our hero. Otherwise, both of them will die. Elsewhere, we see President go training with Jinchul. The old man advises him that when he enters the dungeons, he must be very careful because that's where true human nature is revealed. Returning to the scumbags, Jinho refuses to obey and chooses to side with our hero to fight against them. Just then, a notification pops up in Jin's vision, distracting him, and one of the hunters takes the opportunity to land a hard hit. However, it doesn't affect him much. What really shakes him is the notification from the system. It orders him to eliminate the 6 hunters who betrayed them. So our hero has no choice but to take them all down. Otherwise, the system will kill him. And since what happens in the dungeon stays in the dungeons, Jin isn't punished for what he did. Interestingly, just before finishing off Dong-suk, the guy tries to warn him that his brother is someone important, but Jin couldn't care less and sends him straight to the afterlife. And, well, since no one knows what really happened in the dungeon, people believe that the hunters died fighting the boss, which Jinho supposedly defeated while our hero hid. So, the waifu waiting for them outside thanks them for closing the portal and then leaves. In a shift of scenes, we see an investigation begin into what happened in the dungeon. It was suspicious that 2 low-rank hunters managed to defeat a C-rank boss and come out alive, so Jinchul suspects the kid might be hiding something. Meanwhile, our hero arrives home safely and even tells his sister that he's set aside money for their mother's treatment. He also buys some fried chicken and a few beers. While enjoying his drink, he realizes he's unlocked a new skill called Health and Longevity, which allows him to regenerate his body. At that moment, his sister interrupts to tell him that Jinho is calling. We then see him meet up with Jinho at a cafe, where Jinho asks for his help with dungeon raids. But our hero declines, explaining that he doesn't want to get involved with more hunters and risk exposing his true power. However, Jinho begs him, saying they'd only need to complete 19 raids, which would give him enough experience to start his own guild, and he'd pay him 30 million. He also explains that he wants to outshine his brother, so his father will put him in charge of the family company. But despite all this, our hero stands firm and leaves. Before he does, though, Jinho tries to blackmail him, saying that if he agrees to help, he won't reveal his true power to anyone. Jin knows he's bluffing, but that's not the real problem. We see elsewhere that Dong-suk's brother, Huang, an S-rank hunter, has learned of his brother's death. Knowing it wasn't an accident, he plans to travel to our hero's country to kill him and Jinho. On another note, while Jin is working out, he reconsiders Jinho's proposal. After finishing, he earns more rewards, including a key to an S-rank dungeon, where he can find the ingredients to create the Elixir of Life, a potion that can magically cure any illness. Because of this, our hero decides to go after the elixir to save his mother and enters the dungeon. The first thing he encounters is Cerberus, a massive 3-headed dog that beats him to a pulp result, even when he tries to escape, the monster strikes him, causing him to lose his teleportation stone. But just as he's about to meet his end, he remembers he still has Kazaka's potion. He takes it, gets a massive power boost, and barely manages to defeat Cerberus. Afterward, he levels up several times and earns multiple rewards, including the recipe for the elixir of life. But to create it, he needs 3 specific ingredients, which are supposedly in this dungeon. However, despite his desperate need, he realizes that if he continues in his current state, he's going to get wrecked, so he decides to come back for it later. In a change of scene, our hero visits his mother and reflects on how he needs to get stronger to obtain the elixir that could save her. Because of this, he approaches Jinho and agrees to the guild proposal, but with the condition that it's just the 2 of them. However, there's a complication. C-rank dungeons require at least 8 hunters to enter, but our hero assures him it's not an issue. They can do what Dong-suk did and hire 6 more people just to meet the requirement, while he takes care of all the monsters and levels up. Knowing this could build a strong reputation for the guild, Jinho agrees to the condition. Meanwhile, the blonde receives a visit after her training from a guy who gives her his contact card. For what purpose? No clue. Maybe we'll find out later. On another note, Jinho talks to his father, who mentions his desire to create a hunter guild, seeing great economic potential from all the items obtained in dungeons. However, to make this happen, he needs hunters, and the biggest challenge is recruiting an S-rank hunter as the leader. There are only 9 S-rank hunters in the country, and all of them are affiliated with existing guilds. That's why his brother sent someone to try to recruit the blonde. Back to Jean, he receives an invitation to join a D-rank dungeon raid, and since he doesn't have any other work, he decides to accept. At the same time, we see that Chief Song, Ju-hee, and other survivors from the temple incident also receive the invitation. Elsewhere, Beck and Choi meet to discuss how Jinho's father is trying to poach an S-rank hunter from them, and Choi mentions that he also wants to recruit him for a mission back on the island we saw at the beginning. Apparently, they hadn't completely dealt with the monsters there, and both had lost important people on that island. After Beck leaves, the blonde goes to Choi and tells him that she was approached to join the new guild, but turned down the offer without a second thought. The next day, our hero arrives at the raid location and finds himself face to face with Chief Song, Ju-hee, Kim, and 2 other survivors from the temple. It turns out Ju-hee wanted to confront her trauma, and seeing the hero's determination motivated her to join. Chief Song was there because he wanted to be useful even with 1 arm, and Kim needed money for his family. But the awkward reunion doesn't end there. 3 convicted hunters also arrive, escorted by Kong, a B-rank hunter responsible for overseeing the convicts. They're joining the raid due to the shortage of hunters lately, and in exchange, they'll get reduced sentences. Without further delay, they appoint Chief Song as the team captain and enter the dungeon. As the raid begins, Jean identifies the location of the boss and decides to split the group, leading everyone down different paths to avoid confrontation with it. Elsewhere, Kong recalls how the father of a girl who had been a victim of the convicts paid him to eliminate them. He follows through on this, but Kim and his partner catch him in the act. Before Jean can reach them, Kong kills them both. Ju-hee tries to heal Kim, but he passes away. Kong then emerges from the shadows, attempting to eliminate Ju-hee, but Jean steps in to stop him. Chief Song confronts Kong about his actions and, thinking Jean is weak, asks Ju-hee to help him fight Kong. However, he ends up being overpowered and defeated. But just before Kong can deliver the final blow, Jean intervenes, saving Chief Song. This makes Kong realize that Jean is no ordinary E-rank hunter and might have experienced a second awakening. Jean then questions Kang's motives for killing so many people, and Kong reveals that he does it simply because he enjoys it. This triggers a fight between them. Seeing they are evenly matched, Kong uses his stealth ability to gain an advantage. However, Jean, using his system abilities, detects him despite the stealth. Not only that, but Jean manages to make Kong feel like he's the prey instead of the hunter. Without giving him a chance to defend himself, Jean stabs him in the heart, ending the fight. Afterward, Jean finishes clearing the dungeon and exits with his remaining teammates. Outside, they encounter Jinchul, who has already uncovered Kang's actions and questions them about who killed him. To protect Jean, Chief Song claims that he was the one who did it. Meanwhile, Ju-hee decides to leave her life as a hunter to work with her mother in a food shop. Jean, on the other hand, remembers Jinchul's warning about Huang, who will likely seek him out to avenge his brother's death. And since Huang is an S-rank hunter, the law can't do much to help him. But instead of fear, this gives Jean a new motivation to become stronger. Sometime later, Jean and Jinho meet up with a group of hunters for a raid. Jean uses the rune he obtained from Kong, gaining his stealth ability. But before entering the dungeon, they tell the others to wait outside, keep quiet, and in return, they'll be paid for their assistance. Once inside, Jinho focuses on collecting resources while Jean defeats monsters, levels up, and gains special abilities. He steadily improves his stats and equipment, inching closer to a rank, though he knows he still has a long way to go to reach S rank. During this, a profession-related quest appears, but for now, he stays focused on the dungeon work. Over time, an employee of the White Tiger Guild, begins to suspect that Jean may have experienced a second awakening. He's survived several dangerous events that would normally threaten the life of an E-rank hunter, and he's been clearing dungeons on his own. This leads on to seek him out at his workplace, where he confirms his suspicions and decides to stick around until evening to discuss business with him. Back with Jean, we see him meet with On, who, knowing Jean is classified as E-rank, assumes he doesn't make much money. On offers him a contract with the White Tiger Guild, but Jean declines, as Jinho offered him $3 million for the job, far more than On was willing to pay. What irritates Jean most, though, is that On has been investigating him, so he uses his stealth ability to intimidate On, warning him to back off unless he wants trouble. This makes On realize he shouldn't meddle in Jin's business. They eventually strike a deal to avoid conflict. Hearing that the White Tiger Guild is struggling with a shortage of portals, Jean offers to sell them 3 portals they have at the moment. This satisfies On, who acknowledges that Jean is even more promising than he thought. But unfortunately for On, the portal arrangement is actually a trick Jean devised as revenge for being spied on. In a shift of scenes, Jean heads toward his profession change mission, distancing himself from the city to enter it. He realizes that this mission could be his toughest yet, as it gives him the option to decline. But since it's an opportunity to gain a profession and become stronger, he enters the dungeon without hesitation. However, he remembers he hasn't completed his daily mission, which might cause issues afterward. Inside, he encounters an armored monster that's immune to constant attacks, but he manages to defeat it through brute force. The problem is that there are many of them, and this dungeon doesn't allow him to use potions or recovery abilities, so he has to be cautious. Meanwhile, Jinho meets with his father and brother, the latter warning him not to interfere with his work. Back with Jean, he's attacked by mages and assassins. Realizing this is his most challenging mission yet. While he fights these monsters, we see Choi, on the other hand, assembling a group of powerful hunters ready for the Jeju Island raid. Returning to Jean, after a while of fighting, he manages to rest and acquires an invisible armor that boosts his stats, allowing him to advance to the next phase. As soon as he opens the door, he feels an overwhelming presence reminiscent of the Double Dungeon, a powerful force from which he can't escape. This comes from the knight guarding an empty throne, marked by red, indicating he's different from the previous monsters. The Crimson Knight doesn't hold back, attacking ferociously and destroying the area in seconds, giving Jean no chance to defend. Seeing that his dagger can't penetrate the armor, Jean resorts to using his fists for greater impact. In response, Igris, the knight, discards his sword to uphold his title of knight, displaying immense confidence. Meanwhile, Choi ensures he has Go's approval for the raid, although he insists it's just an investigation. In truth, the battle from years ago still haunts him, and he wants to end it once and for all. Back with Jean, he tries to attack Igris with everything he has, but it's as ineffective as before. Despite his abilities, the knight remains too powerful, sending Jean flying back to the throne with a single blow and preparing to deliver the final strike. But just then, Jean grabs Igris's sword and charges at him, pinning him against the wall. After a fierce struggle, he finally manages to defeat Igris, though he's left exhausted, recognizing that Igris surpassed him in both experience and natural talent. However, he gains several rewards, including a lot of gold, a new helmet, and an ability called the Ruler's Hand. Unfortunately, the mission isn't over yet, as a horde of monsters fills the room, with the new objective being to survive as long as possible. While they're weaker than Igris, there are too many for Jean to handle alone. He tries to hide using his stealth ability, but it's useless as the room forces him to stay in combat. Shortly after, he loses his only teleportation stone, leaving him with no choice but to survive amidst this relentless wave of monsters. The monsters begin to corner Jean, but he's not giving up without a fight. He attacks any that come close, but his efforts start to wear him down. He slowly tires to the point where he begins to hallucinate, recalling all the times he was called weak. His past self, the one who never ranked up, appears, taunting him and saying he's only changed on the outside, still the same weakling inside. It scolds him for taking on such a dangerous mission despite being so pathetic. As Jin's life begins to fade, he receives a notice that he's being transported to the penalty zone, saving him from death at the last second. He uses the opportunity to heal and fight off the giant centipedes attacking him. Meanwhile, we see his sister worried because he hasn't come home yet, hoping he'll return soon since they have an appointment the next day at her school. Back with Jean, hours pass, and he manages to survive the penalty zone, leveling up and acquiring a new weapon, the Night Slayer. This weapon deals extra damage to armored foes, and he also uses Igris's rune, which grants him the Ruler's Hand ability, allowing him to move objects without touching them. He soon returns to the battlefield, now better equipped and ready for round 2. Meanwhile, Choi and the other hunters approach Jeju Island and notice something strange in the water. Back with Jean, his new equipment gives him an edge, but he realizes the monsters keep spawning because the mages are summoning them. He targets the mages to clear the area, but the monsters respond by combining their magic to create a giant golem. Jean quickly dispatches the mages, then faces the golem. Though it's tougher, it's still not not enough to defeat him, and once Jean destroys it, the mission ends. With the large number of points he's accumulated, the system offers him the Necromancer class, granting him the power to resurrect fallen monsters as shadows to fight for him. Jean hesitates as he's more of a frontline assassin, but since he'll retain his existing skills, he decides to choose the profession, gaining a significant power boost along with a secondary class, Shadow Monarch, which provides even more points. He starts hearing and sensing something within the monsters' bodies and establishes a command to summon them. When he orders them to rise, the shadows of the monsters emerge as his new soldiers. However, there's a limit to this ability, and Jean decides to release the basic shadows to try resurrecting Igris. His first 2 attempts fail, so Jean speaks to the knight, telling him not to let his abilities go to waste waiting for someone who will never come, and instead to make Jean his new master. With this, Igris is convinced to rise and serve alongside Jin's legion of soldiers, making Jean not only his master, but the new hope for all hunters. And so, the first part of this masterpiece comes to a close. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to show it some love and leave the word hunter in the comments so we can release the second part when it's out. Bye!